Richmond Raceway. Can Denny Hamlin get back to victory lane at his home track? Is Alex Bowman heating up at the right time? We discuss all that and more. I am now joined by Dale Tanhardt here to talk a little Richmond Raceway, a second short track race of the season. Dale, it's great to have you on the show as always. I want to start with Hendrick Motorsports. You and I were just talking before we hit the record button, but last season at Richmond, the spring race, Hendrick looked unbeatable. They finished 1-2 with Josh Berry in that 9 car, but by the late summer, Hendrick seemed out to lunch. They didn't have any cars finished inside the top 10. I want to start with Hendrick Motorsports. Do you feel like there's any potential favorites in that mix? Do you think that William Byron could continue his hot start to the season?
Yeah, look, thanks for having me back on again, Eric. Been a hot start to the season, and Richmond comes up at a time where all the debate about the short track package will rage on. It's like we had a glimmer of hope with Bristol Motor Speedway, even though the package is different. The tires are going to be a little bit different. But Richmond's been kind of a wild card over the past few years when before the Gen 7 era, it wasn't a wild card at all when it comes to the parity of winners. And Hendrick Motorsports is right in that ballpark of where do we or how do we handicap them, because before 2021, when Alex Bowman won here, they hadn't won a Richmond race since Jimmy Johnson in 2008, which is crazy.
Wow.
It's been a Gibbs-Penske playground before the Gen 7 era. And then they came here spring of 2023, like you said, and lit it up. And yeah, there was a little bit of strategy that helped Kyle Larson go to victory lane and Josh Berry, who was filling in for Chase Elliott, get a P2. But William Byron was really good in this race and arguably had the best car alongside Martin Truex Jr., and they kind of had a bad pit stop at the end of that race, got wrecked on a late race restart, and I don't know where Byron even ended up finishing, but he led a lot of laps. And over the spring of 2022 and 2023, Byron has been a big-time contender. Kyle Larson's been hot and cold. Chase Elliott hasn't been there. And Alex Bowman has been okay, not great. But William Byron's the one I got my eye on with Hendrick Motorsports because, once again, I called it last week. I thought 12-1 was way too long on Benjamin Bill heading into a road course at Circuit of the Americas. I think 12-1 on Caesars Sportsbook is once again too long for William Byron heading into this weekend.
Yeah, William Byron, the first two-time winner this season. And you just mentioned he did lead 117 laps at Richmond 1 year ago. I want to talk about Alex Bowman, though. I do want to zero in on one Hendrick driver in particular because he has won at Richmond in recent years. Granted, it was the Gen 6 era, 2021. Again, I think some strategy came into play towards the end of that race as well, some late race restarts. What do you make of Alex Bowman's chances this week, considering he's riding a little hot streak? Back-to-back fourth-place finishes coming in.
Yeah, shout out Alex Bowman. He won us a lot of money at COTA last week. And yeah, it's a decent track for him, and a track that he snuck up and won before in 2021, like you said, which was a hot year for him. Been a little cold ever since on getting back to victory lane. But like you said, he's got momentum, 2 top 5s in a row. And when it comes to his value, this is a guy trending around 50-1, 60-1 to win the race, which I wouldn't expect that. I would expect a guy in a Hendrick car who's got momentum and is a previous winner at this racetrack to be more around 30-1, 35-1. So that, to me, is a pretty wild stat. I know that a lot of guys in the industry are already on Bowman back-to-back. We love the momentum. We love what he did last week, and he might keep it up here at Richmond. And one thing I do like, too, is that he's plus money for a top 10. And to me, that's even crazier than being a 60-1 outright, because you got a lot of guys, like a few guys in the SHR fleet, in the Trackhouse fleet that are minus odds for a top 10 that they've been okay at Richmond, but not amazing. And Alex Bowman, a Hendrick car being plus money for a top 10, I think is a good bet heading into the weekend if you're feeling the momentum with the 48 team.
Yeah, Richmond can be a difficult track to predict. Again, like we talked about before we started recording, in the spring race last year, it was Hendrick Motorsports. They got the win. All 4 Hendrick cars led laps. They looked great. But by the late summer, when they went back to Richmond, none of the Hendrick cars led a single lap, and none of them finished inside the top 10. So you're kind of like, oh, it's all or nothing with a team like Hendrick and Toyota for that matter. Spring last year, Toyota didn't look so hot, but the fall race or the summer race at Richmond, Toyota led, I think, 199 out of 400 laps. So I want to transition to Toyota, specifically Denny Hamlin. He's a Virginia native. He's a four-time winner at this track. Do you feel Denny Hamlin could get his second, well, third if you conclude the Clash, but second win of the season this weekend?
Yeah, at this point, I'm not super high on Denny just because he's a favorite, and I think he's a little expensive, and he's just mistake prone, right? Like Denny is a guy, he's an old head who dominates at tracks like this, a Richmond, a Bristol, a Darlington. I mean, this is a great old man racetrack, and Denny Hamlin is in old man territory and has a great Richmond resume. But I'm not willing to pay 4.5, 5 to 1 on Denny leading into the weekend until I see cars hit the track. Another element that's interesting about this one is this is our first night race in a couple years here, with a Sunday
Yeah.
night race with the Easter weekend deal. They're kind of keeping it in that time slot like Bristol Dirt was the prior couple of years, where it's a Sunday night event,
Yeah.
and we're going to practice and qualify in daytime conditions. So
Ooh, good point.
for those reasons, I think it's a little early to bet on somebody at that price where Denny Hamlin is. But there's no doubt in my mind he's probably going to be a factor. Finished second here to Chris Buescher last fall, won here in 2022 spring, and has won here multiple times before that. So if you bet Denny right now, I don't blame you, but I don't advise it just because let's see cars hit the track before we make a big bet on a favorite at the price of Denny Hamlin before we get to Saturday.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement, though. It is fair to have him priced as the favorite, because he has been so good here in recent seasons. 5 top fives in the last 6 Richmond races. But I want to expand the conversation to his teammates. Joe Gibbs Racing is off to a very strong start this season. They've historically been very good at Richmond. I noticed this stat. Pre-next gen, the final 8 Richmond races of the Gen 6 era, Joe Gibbs Racing won 6 of them. 75% winning percentage. That's pretty great. Or 750 winning percentage, however they calculate that. But since the next gen was introduced, it's only 4 races at Richmond, but they've only got that 1 win spring of 22 with Denny Hamlin. So do you like the other Toyota or the other Joe Gibbs Racing drivers this weekend?
Yeah, I got my eye on Martin Truex Jr., and it's crazy how good their lineup is right now, man. I mean, Christopher Bell has been awesome to start 2024. Coulda, shoulda, woulda won the COTA race had that gone a little bit differently with their pit stops, and if the strategy may have worked a little bit better. I mean, he literally a lap short of passing William Byron for the win. Ty Gibbs has been knocking on the door. You just talked about Denny Hamlin. But Martin Truex has been awesome at Richmond in the latter half of his career. And one big thing that sticks out to me, I talked about, it's a night race. Last 4 night races at Richmond, 3 of them have been won by Martin Truex Jr. And in the one that he didn't win, fall of 2020, he finished second to
Wow.
Brad Keselowski. So look, everybody wants the Mondays are for Martin type of vibe narrative. He always wins Monday races, but he always wins night races too when it comes to Richmond Raceway. And one thing I think about here, as ESPN Bet has the best line on Truex, by the way, it's 6.5 to 1. That's something I might be willing to bet before we get to practice and qualifying in case he shows really good long run speed, which is something that the books have been valuing more recently over the past year or so with lap averages. But what I wanted to say about Martin Truex Jr. is he's got racetracks that he is just dominant at, right?
Yeah.
When I think of Martin Truex Jr. approved racetracks, I think of Sonoma, track he won at last year, knocked it off in the Gen 7 era. I think of New Hampshire, a track that he knocked off in the Gen 7 era. And I think of Dover, a track that he knocked off in the Gen 7 era. The one that he's missing, a track that he's been very dominant at, is Richmond. Richmond is the one big Martin Truex Jr. approved racetrack that he hasn't won at. When you look at the spring over the past 2 years, he's up there with William Byron on the most laps led. And if it wasn't for strategy being on the wrong side of strategy in 2022 spring and 2023 spring, he'd probably be in victory lane back to back. So it's been interesting at this race with the way the strategies worked out with the 2-stop, 3-stop, and the tire strategy with the fall off. I mean, spring 2022, Denny Hamlin unlapped himself on the final run and repassed Truex and William Byron to win that race. And it is super compelling, but I figured third time would be the charm in this race for Truex to knock it off. And 6.5 to 1 is just calling my name. And one value bet, favorite bet leading into the weekend, a plus money bet on Martin Truex Jr. for a top five via Bet Rivers at plus 115. I think that is something I might hammer before we get into the weekend because a lot of other books like DraftKings, ESPN Bet have minus odds for a Truex top five. Give me plus money on this. I'm gonna go ahead and call it a lock.
That's a great point you made also about the tire and fuel strategy. Definitely will come into play likely in that final stage. We've seen that decide Richmond races in recent memory. And that's a crazy stat that 3 of the past 4 Richmond night races Truex has won. That's an average finish of like 1.2 in Richmond night races. That is unbelievable. I want to talk about Ford as well. We've touched on Chevy and Hendrick. We've touched on some Toyotas. The last time the NASCAR Cup Series raced at Richmond, it was last summer, and it was a Ford. Roush Fenway Keselowski's Chris Buescher going to victory lane. Do you feel like Ford can kind of get on track this weekend, considering right now they've only got one driver in the top 10 in the regular season standings? That's Ryan Blaney.
Yeah, it's surprising Chris Buescher isn't up there, honestly. It feels like
He's
he
close.
sneaks in and runs around the top 10 every single week, and he'll get there. RFK's program has been phenomenal as of recent. They continue to get better. They won this race last fall, as you said. Brad Keselowski led a bunch of laps, and then Chris Buescher, all the way back from the 26th starting position,
Wow.
stormed his way to the front and won. And by the way, that was the highlight of my year, betting wise. I had him 80-1. Couldn't believe it. We were real happy about that one. I don't expect an 80-1 winner this time around, but when it comes to RFK in particular, they're going to lead the Ford camp in every category when it comes to being the favorites. Brad Keselowski is the guy I want to talk about here because he has been knocking on the door of getting that first win since Talladega, spring of 2021. And the short tracks have been better to him and RFK in general. I mean, Chris Buescher has knocked off 2 short track wins in the Gen 7 era. And both of the wins that Buescher had, Brad Keselowski easily could have won if things would have gone a little bit differently with not losing a tire at Bristol in fall of 2022 and strategy with a bad pit stop in fall of 2023. So I like Brad Keselowski. I think I'm willing to wait a little bit on a 12-1 ticket because of what I just mentioned. Chris Buescher started 26th here last year and stormed his way to the front. So maybe you get RFK coming out here this weekend with a bad qualifying run, but they have good practice speed, and you get a better ticket, like an 18-1 or a 20-1 ticket on someone like Brad Keselowski, who's a 2-time Richmond winner. So I think I'm willing to wait. But yeah, I do like the RFK boys this weekend, especially Brad Keselowski.
Yeah, I like that. It is going to be challenging to predict because, like you said, practice and qualifying in the daylight. The vast majority of the race will be under the lights Easter Sunday, so it's going to be a tough one to call going in, but those are some good stats, some good numbers on the RFK guys. We can wrap things up, Dale. Are there any value picks or dark horses, not Ford Mustang dark horses, but like actual dark horses that you're keeping an eye on? I just mentioned Stuart Haas because I think in some ways they've run a little better than expected to start this year. And I know last season, really last few seasons, the shorter flat ovals tend to be their forte. So are there any SHR or other drivers further down the list that people aren't paying attention to?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with SHR. I think they are the dark horse to look at, whether it's an outright, a top five, or a Ford manufacturer prop bet. They're looking at the RFK guys. They're really juiced at 2-1, 2.5-1 to be the top Ford. You can get all 4 SHR guys to be the top Ford at 16-1 or better at a track
Wow.
that they've been great at. They
Yeah.
put multiple cars in the top 10 here last year throughout both races. And I think in one of the races, they put all 4 of the SHR cars in the top 15. And I think Priest may have finished just outside the top 15. But for SHR, that's pretty good when you consider how bad they've been at a lot of racetracks in the schedule. So their forte has been this type of track. Kevin Harvick won here fall of 2022. Ryan Preece had a shot at the win fall of 2023. Eric Almirola in the 10 car, his forte was always the short flat tracks. And he ran decently here as well. Chase Briscoe, we've seen him win at Phoenix and have other good runs at short, flat racetracks with the short track package. So I think, if there's a situation where RFK just somehow doesn't unload with speed, which spring of 2023, they really didn't. Chris Buescher
Yeah.
didn't have a great run, and Brad Keselowski finished right on the edge of the top 10. Never know. SHR, I think, betting all four guys, top Ford, Briscoe, Gregson, Priest, and Josh Berry, who we know is good at the short tracks, and he's got Rodney Childers up in the box, who's had a lot of success at this type of track. Never know. Could be a good bet. Never know with that entire fleet, because this is the type of racetrack that they run better at, a Richmond Raceway type of track.
Yeah, but could be a very bold pick there. I know for one, I do not trust Team Penske at this point. I know Blaney started off the year strong, but even the last couple weeks, he's kind of faded at the end of these races. Actually, Cotto is the opposite. He charged towards the end, but still couldn't get to the top 10. I don't trust Logano, so I do think RFK versus, dare I say, Stuart Haas for best Ford this weekend, would not be a shock at all. Dale, awesome stuff. Really appreciate you being on the show this week. If folks are interested in hearing even more of your NASCAR analytical expertise, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, just add Dale Tanhardt on everything. YouTube channel is relatively new. We were about to hit 500 subscribers after being about, I guess, a month and a half in existence. We're knocking on the door of Eric Estep here on the subscriber numbers. Oh, and shout out to my ring light for not making it through this entire broadcast right here. But yes, at Dale Tanhardt is where you can find me. My show Dale Center is the staple for NASCAR betting, previews for Cup, Xfinity trucks, and when IndyCar is up, we do IndyCar previews as well. So check that out on YouTube or kick.com/Dale Tanhardt, along with my iRacing streams. We mix it up. We have a lot of fun. And when it comes to NASCAR betting, we've had an unbelievably hot start to the year in 2024 when it comes to the NASCAR Cup Series. So I hope you follow along. And Eric, thanks so much for having me on. And I hope everybody has a phenomenal Easter weekend. And hopefully we can bring home the bags.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you being on, Dale. We will talk to you again soon, man.
Thank you.